Hey there, and welcome. We live in a world that's pretty much obsessed with growth, especially economic growth. The whole idea seems so simple, right? As a country gets richer, its people should get happier. But what if the data tells a completely different and way more interesting story?
You'd think it would be a simple equation. For decades now, in many of the world's richest countries, incomes have been skyrocketing. We have more stuff, more opportunities, higher standards of living than ever before in human history. And yet, when you actually look at how happy people say they are, the math just doesn't add up. So that leads us to the big question we're digging into today. If we're all getting richer, why aren't we getting any happier?
And look, this isn't just a hunch or a feeling people have. It's a real, well-documented thing that researchers call the happiness paradox. The definition you see here really nails it. You have this long-term rise in a country's wealth that just doesn't create a similar rise in how happy its people are. So the bottom line is, we've been chasing one number, money, while the one we actually care about, happiness, has just flatlined.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we need to look at the evidence. The data reveals this puzzle that some researchers have called the Great Happiness Stagnation.
And wow, this chart right here, it just lays it all out perfectly. This is based on decades of data from the US, going all the way back to the early 70s, and it tells two completely different stories. On one hand, you see real income per person climbing up and up and up. But on the other hand, average happiness levels, they've stayed stubbornly, frustratingly flat. Those two lines have gone their separate ways, and that growing gap, well, that's where our story really begins.
This just forces us to ask a really fundamental question. If more money for a country isn't the magic bullet for more happiness, then what are we getting wrong? What are the essential ingredients for a good life that we've been completely overlooking in this relentless chase for economic growth?
Well, the first huge piece of this puzzle is what we're going to dive into in our second section here, the relational deficit. This is all about the massive impact of the things you can't buy on the happiness we just can't seem to find.
It's kind of funny. Economists are finally catching up to something psychologists have known forever. We are deeply social creatures. We're wired for connection. The value we get from our close personal relationships, what researchers call relational goods, isn't just some nice little bonus. It's a fundamental human need. Every bit as important for our well-being as food or shelter. And the scary part is, a lot of signs suggest these goods are getting harder and harder to come by.
And get this, researchers actually trying to put a price tag on that feeling of loss. The economists Blanchflower and Oswald calculated how much extra cash someone would need every year to make up for the happiness they lose after a marriage ends. And the number they came up with in the US? About $100,000 a year. That is a staggering figure, and it just goes to show how incredibly valuable our relationships are in real, tangible terms.
So you might be wondering, why do some of us struggle with relationships more than others? And what does that have to do with chasing money? Well, psychology tells us to look at our earliest years. A concept called attachment theory says that our ability to build healthy, rewarding relationships as adults is deeply, profoundly shaped by those first bonds we have with our parents or caregivers.
And this table here breaks it down really well. If you have a secure attachment style, you tend to be trusting and you get a lot of joy from your relationships. That makes you less likely to lean on materialism. But if you have an insecure style, preoccupied or avoidant, which often comes from inconsistent or emotionally distant parenting, you might struggle. You might become anxious in relationships or learn to wall off your emotions. For people in that boat, the clear, predictable signals of the marketplace, buy this, get that, can feel like a much safer substitute for the messy, confusing world of human connection.
And look, this is not some small niche problem. We're talking about roughly half the adult population here falling into one of those insecure attachment styles. That means a huge chunk of our society might be hardwired to prioritize getting stuff over getting close to people. Not because they're greedy, but because it's a coping mechanism they learned a long, long time ago.
All right, that brings us to our third section and the second big problem, the comparison trap. This is all about how modern life itself can sometimes actively work against our own well-being.
Okay, so here's a real head-scratcher, a paradox inside the paradox. Research by Iris Moss and her team shows that wanting to be happy too much can actually make you less happy. How does that even work? Well, when you're constantly checking in on yourself, am I happy yet? How about now? Am I happy enough? You almost can't help but start comparing how you feel to some perfect ideal, or, even worse, to how happy you think everyone else is. And
What's the biggest engine for social comparison ever built? Yep, social media. There was this fascinating study that looked at a group of employees. Some of them were restricted from using Facebook, others weren't. And they found this crystal clear link. The more time people spent on Facebook, the more they compared themselves to others. And that constant comparing, well, it had a direct cost. It was tied, in turn, to lower levels of happiness. This was especially true for younger folks and for people who already kind of believed their friends were having a better time than they were, which, let's be honest, is a feeling a perfectly curated Instagram feed is designed to create. And this quote from the researchers is really the key takeaway. They say, social comparison fully mediates the effect. Now, what on earth does that mean? Basically, comparison isn't just a factor, it's the main highway. It appears to be the primary psychological road that leads from using Facebook to feeling less happy, at least in their study. It's the whole mechanism.
Okay, so we've got this relational deficit, and we're stuck in the comparison trap. It sounds a little grim, right? But here's the good news. The research also points a way forward. That brings us to Section 4, a different path to happiness, one that's all about shifting our focus from getting to giving.
So, let's go back to money for a second. After everything we've talked about, is it possible that money can actually buy happiness? The answer is yes, but just not in the way we usually think about it.
Let me introduce you to the idea of pro-social spending. It's a fancy term for a simple idea: using your money to benefit other people. It could be buying a friend a coffee, donating to a cause you care about, getting a gift for your mom, anything. And what researchers find over and over again is that this kind of spending gives you a much bigger and longer-lasting happiness boost than spending that same amount on yourself. And here is the part that just blew my mind. The research shows that the good feeling you get from giving isn't really about the amount of money. People who remembered spending just $20 on someone else felt just as happy as people who remembered spending $100. It tells you that it's the act of giving that really counts, not the price tag.
All right, for our fifth and final section, let's talk about something incredibly powerful, something that costs nothing and is the perfect antidote to that comparison trap: finding your flow. This is about discovering the ultimate reward that comes from within.
The term was coined by the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and don't worry, I'm not going to try to say that name again, but flow is that incredible, magical feeling of being completely in the zone. It's when you're so absorbed in what you're doing that the rest of the world just fades away. You're challenged, but your skills are right there to meet it. It isn't about chilling on the couch. It's an active, energized, and deeply satisfying state of mind.
So what does it feel like? Well, here are the key ingredients. You've got intense focus on what you're doing right now. Your actions and your awareness just kind of merge together. It feels automatic. And you lose that nagging voice in your head, that self-consciousness, the very thing that drives social comparison. Time can get all weird, speeding up or slowing down. And most importantly, you're doing the activity just for the love of it, not for some prize at the end.
So when you put it all together, you have to wonder, maybe we've been framing this whole question the wrong way. We see that chasing wealth doesn't seem to work, and comparing ourselves to others totally backfires. But investing in our relationships, giving to others, and losing ourselves in a meaningful challenge, that stuff works. It leaves us with one last thought to chew on. What if the goal isn't to chase happiness at all, but to build a life where happiness just shows up, to create the conditions for it to find you?